Welcome to Platemark Series 2, The History of Western Printmaking. My name is Ann Shafer, and I'm your host, and I'm here with the fabulous
True Ludwig.
True Ludwig. Now, if you've been following along, you know that True Ludwig and I taught the history of prints on behalf of the Maryland Institute College of Art using the collection at the museum I worked at, the Baltimore Museum of Art. And so over, 15 times, I think?
17, 18, if you really think about it. But 15 legit full bore.
But it was a lot. So nobody teaches it better than True. And so my plan is to talk through the history of Western printmaking. But honestly, when I started making the list of sort of following along on the syllabus, it would be an endless list of episodes. So the plan is to have us talk to you about certain figures in the history of Western printmaking and probably moments in time and movements and things. And then provide you with either links or the images themselves on the webpage with the show notes, which is, platemarkpodcast.com. And before we get rolling, we're just going to do our usual traditional positionality things.
Okay.
I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. We are recording this at the Purple Crayon Press in Baltimore, Maryland.
Arm pump.
Fist pump. The land of the Piscataway Conoy people.
Indeed. And I'm True Ludwig. I identify as a gay white male. I'm from Iowa, but I live on the East Coast. I think my positionality still as a Midwesterner has a lot to do with my making and my doing and my thinking and my work.
Well, it pops up every time we do the positionality statements.
I can't help it. Well, that's my position and I'm sticking to it.
That's right. True's from Iowa. Hear you. Okay. So in order to keep this to a manageable, bite-sized sort of thingy-o-bob, we are going to skipping stone across the history of Western prints. And so if you've been following along, you should have listened already to some establishing episodes that talked about sort of the social milieu at the time and the start of printing, and also materials and techniques, right? And some other stuff that you should also listen to.
Well, you could if you chose to, but then again, you may just want to cut to the greatest hits, the best parts. You know, when you get your first big star like Albrecht Dürer, then maybe you just want to go to the best parts.
Okay, so one could inch back a bit earlier than where we're starting, but we're going to start with our boy Albrecht Dürer. He's the man. He kind of changed everything.
Kind of did. And it's interesting. Anne had I said Anne had to spell out for me, what is it that we're supposed to be covering in this? Because, if we were going to talk about it as a history of prints class, we really would have to set it up. We talked basically about how paper had become a commodity, a newish commodity in the western part of Europe. About 1400, and then we had mentioned our good old friend Johannes Gutenberg, and he didn't invent movable type, but he certainly was the one that put it on the map by printing the Bible about 1455 or so for the very first time. It was only a mere 3 massive volumes, huge. I'm sorry, that sounds like somebody we don't like. Huge, thick volumes, maybe 24 inches by 15 inches wide. And, that having the idea, the use of a printing press to get scripture out there was a big deal. But also it made a need for images that could go with the text as well. And there were standalone prints. And we talked about how certain people with a few pennies to rub together could go to pilgrimage sites and pick up a print of their favorite patron saint. Let's say it was St. Christopher, the guy that would be your patron saint of travelers, or St. Sebastian, who would protect you from the plague. And you would have this sort of as a pocket talisman. And so the early images in the history of prints tend to be fairly simple, maybe one person in them. But by the middle of the 15th century, there's a bit of an expansion of what images could be, and artists. Well, actually, at that time they weren't even really artists yet,
Oh, right.
Because if you think about the history of prints, we don't start thinking of artists making prints until you get to people like Schongauer and Albrecht Dürer, and you start realizing that these, by the end of the 15th century, it's where the artists that were painters and had other aspects of a trade, an artistic trade, could look to prints and use them as an ancillary part of what they did or try their hand at them. But it was really Albrecht Dürer who just flat out went, yes, he was a brilliant painter, but he realized he could make a whole lot more money with his prints. And and he was smart enough, savvy enough to figure out a way to reach a broader market than anybody had ever managed to before. I mean, he was a shrewd businessman and really quite visionary in putting together the zeitgeist and his skills and what he had at his command and what he could, the forces that he could muster. So, the fact that it doesn't hurt that you come from a ton of talent.
Well, and also he's got publishing houses left and right around him. Like Nuremberg was a center for that, but also members of his family were.
Right. So let's just dial it back to little Albrecht being one of 17 children. Shout out to Mom. Maybe not all of them made it to maturity, but he certainly was the biggest hit. Others in the family had been also learned the goldsmithing trade from their father. And that was common, to be an apprentice to your father or a family member, an uncle or so. And Albrecht, though, was, I love to, in class, I love to show them a picture of, various items that a goldsmith would make. And Albrecht, having done this silver point of himself at the age of 12 or 13. And it's just ridiculous, a self-taught person whose incisive vision, and picking up a piece of silver and making marks on a piece of prepared paper, a little self-portrait. It's so winning. It's just full of his own vision of self. And you can see him running his eyes over every aspect of his own physique, of his nose and the slant of his eyes and the pudginess of his young flesh in his face and this finger pointing out at the world as though he's going to take it all on. And this is just essentially a preteen figuring out, hey, this is cool. I can do that. And by the time he's 15, his dad says, off you go. I have taught you everything I know. And so he's done apprenticing to his father. And then we get to Ann's point.
No, well, my question actually is, how good were the mirrors at this point to give you sort of an accurate image to draw from?
That's an excellent question, because if we were to look at some of the great, what we would air quotes, fine art painters such as Jan van Eyck, who was essentially the Northern Renaissance artists, have a mode of looking. I like to have my students learn the term omnivoyant, meaning they see everything. They see the surfaces of everything. They see from the tiniest dewdrop on a leaf and every vein in the leaf all the way to the macrocosmic, the billows of a cloud. And they're able to put that onto a painting it onto a wooden panel where every single jot and tittle before your eyes is visible. If you're Jan van Eyck and it's a self-portrait, which I don't know if you've seen that, Anne. Have you seen the self-portrait of Jan van Eyck? It's in the British Museum. No, it's at the National Gallery in London, and it is a whopping, maybe 6 by 8 inches.
Remember when we were there, it was really crowded and we could hardly see the Arnolfini wedding portrait.
Out loud. Yeah. So here's something. It's whiz. It's the size, the self-portrait of Jan van Eyck in a red turban, and it's eerie because you see the stubble on a man's face. You see the feathery kind of lines of wrinkles around his eyes. You see his gaze straight at you, and the mirrors had to have been pretty good because he could record that, and if you were to say, gosh, how could they see such things? Well, you actually do see little moments of people holding magnifying glasses and whatnot when they're trying to read. If you look at any kind of medieval manuscript, with all the marginalia, all those beautiful little drawings and whatnot, this idea of looking at things with incredible precision and making the tiniest marks, that was something that the Northern artists had always been really exquisite at doing. And so, in a way, I think that Albrecht Dürer was an inheritor of that sense of having of being able to capture and replicate with your drawing hand everything in your sight. That nothing was unworthy of being scrutinized and then put to paper. And that's why when we look at this youngster, this self-portrait, and Anne will put it up for you, I swear, it gives you this huge salvo of what this young man will do, when he gets out into the world and can do something other than just drawing himself. So, he's an inheritor of a very rich tradition in the North in terms of, wonderfully rendered drapery and beautiful hair. And there's an oil painting tradition in Northern Renaissance art, which is just absolutely exquisite and actually outstrips anything Italy was doing at the time. And yet we don't always know the structure of the body underneath the drapery. We don't always know just exactly how the body will move in space. But it was Albrecht Dürer who managed to take all of the mastery of vision of the North and the way it was applied to the surfaces of things, and travel to Italy and realize, oh, this is how my Italian counterparts are doing it. They're used to a different culture of understanding the body nude, of being able to depict a nude body because they see the sculptures of antiquity around them, or this completely different mode of rendering things in physical reality, understanding the proportions of the human body in perspective.
My theory has always been that it was too cold to pose nude in the North.
I always tell my students that, they're always swaddled in drapery. It's a great way to get around. Like I say, like when you were in grade school and you needed to draw a picture of yourself and you didn't want to draw hands because you knew you'd suck, you just put them in your pockets, right? Or you have your hands behind your back. And our Northern Renaissance artists really convince us that they look fabulous under all that drapery. But it was also because in the North, the textile trade was so huge. I mean, all the beautiful woolens because of the wool that could be imported from England. And yeah, it's pretty damn cold up there. It was Dürer's ability to think. He was the first artist to become an international celebrity. Nobody in his time, nobody in Italy would have known an artist in the North at all, really, until he crossed the Alps. The first, I always tell my students, the big volley was when some Medici bankers that had been up in Bruges purchased the Portinari altarpiece, and they brought it out. This big, gorgeous altarpiece was, painted with beautiful colors and wonderful figures and a landscape that was gorgeous, and they put it into their chapel, the Portinari family chapel. And the Italians would have gone, oh, God, that oil paint is so gorgeous. Look how scrumptious those colors are. What are these tempera paints that we've been using? They're kind of, dim and real pretty, but they're not sumptuous and succulent. And frescoes look great, but look at that oil paint. It's sexy. But what's wrong with these Northerners, man? Those bodies all look pudgy and, okay, and here's another joke. If it's Northern art, Northern Renaissance art, you know how you can tell? Everybody in it looks like Putin. They do, actually. They do, right? Oh even Christchild does. I'm sorry. And that's real drag if you don't like Putin.
But I love the differences that people forget that the differences in styles between the North and the South are more driven by materials.
Oh, yeah.
And culture and what's at hand rather than some, decision about aesthetics.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really is. And it was Albrecht Dürer who permeated that. I call it, well, Anne will know, having seen my class notes, the Alps, the Alps, the Alps, the Alps. But I want you to think about somebody that, okay, Dürer was born in 1471. He's with his dad, and his dad says, off you go. You've done a beautiful job, but now you've got to go learn something. And he shoves him off to Michael Wohlgemuth, who happens to be a printmaker who's working conveniently in Albrecht Dürer's godfather's printing press. Anton Koberger had one of the biggest, most successful presses in Nuremberg. Well, Nuremberg, that's not that far from Wittenberg and Mainz, where Gutenberg was printing. And so Dürer was a perfect moment to just be able to absorb these things. And he was a total sponge, and in a way, he's sort of like a human, an artistic cocklebur,
An artistic what?
Cocklebur. He could just stick to a thing until he got it. He totally really understood it. Dürer had been working. I mean, it's interesting to see his northern traditions in his drawings and his woodcuts, and he's doing a serviceable job, right? And let's see, he has apprenticed, and then they cut him loose when he's 19, and he does his Wandeljahre. He's a journeyman. He's no longer an apprentice. He's a journeyman, and that's the second part. If you're going to work your way up in a guild, you start as an apprentice, then you go to a journeyman, and then you become a master. And how do you become a master? You do your masterpiece. The way you gain entrance into the local guild is that you have to present your best work to date, and you present it to the members of the guild, and if they decide that it's good enough, they vote you in, and that becomes that work that you showed them as your masterpiece. And so if we think about how that's a certain form of validation, that's pretty huge. Well, so Dürer's done his apprenticeship. He's going to go be a journeyman now, and he's like 19, and he has to go start selling books for his godfather. And then he decides, I want to go visit one of these other printmakers that I just heard about. He's so cool. His name's Martin Schongauer, and he's done these prints. I've seen this print. It's a Temptation of St. Anthony, and it's amazing. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. You imagine the best creatures out of Dr. Seuss, like yanking and pulling on this weazened old man as he's being raised up in the air by all of these hideous little creatures that are snapping and snarling, and they have honker hooty noses, and one of them even has his little unclad bum hanging out, and and plenty of drapery, and they're yanking on his beard, and it's just this amazing image of St. Anthony being tormented, and St. Anthony's face is as calm as it could be. And I think what happened was that Dürer saw that image and thought, it's a print. How is he making something? Because Schongauer was actually a painter, but he had started doing prints. And so Albrecht wants to go visit the man that made this cool print and some other gorgeous prints, which we won't even allude to. And he gets to Strasbourg to meet him. And what's the problem, man?
Schongauer's dead.
Damn it. Yeah. So he's made this trip from Nuremberg, and he's wandered all the way over there to Strasbourg, and he ends up working in Basel for a while, trying to sell some books for Uncle Anton. And eventually he decides, I think that the art up here just looks kind of stodgy, and I think I should go find out more about what's going on in Italy. And so he goes over the Alps. Imagine walking over the Alps, and you're a whopping, 23 years old, and you're like, I've heard there's a bunch of Germans down in Venice, because there's a whole bunch of mercenaries down there, by the way, and you could hire them, and they could be your mercenary soldiers. It's really fascinating. In fact, if you look at some of those Bellini paintings, like The Tempest, that's a German mercenary soldier that's standing there looking at the well, we would call her Roma now, but the gypsy woman nursing her child. So he goes down, there's some Germans down there. I'm going to see what's going down there, and I want to learn about this guy named Bellini and some other painters. I just think about walking. You take your junior year of travel, and you walk across the Alps, and you walk over to Venice, and start looking at what the artists are doing, and start looking at the difference of the countryside, and you start looking at what nature how it looks different. And, I just can see the eyeballs on this young man just jiggling with delight. And his records of these journeys are really something. Anne was, reminding me earlier that Dürer is one of the best documented artists we have, with all of the copious notes that he took and the travel records that he kept and the sketches that he does. And then in the artwork that he subsequently produces, you can say, oh yeah, man, he totally saw that in Venice, but he does a great cover of it in his own, adding the Italian sense of structure and knowledge to the northern sense of wanting to put all of the most beautiful cladding all over something. I mean, he really marries the North and the South in a way that had never been done before. And it makes him just magnetic in terms of what's possible,
Yeah, he's something. Okay, so we've gotten to Italy when he's 20 or something, 19.
Well, but we got to give props to, his godfather in the publishing business, because that means that he's understanding what is a publishing business. What sells? You don't just print a whole bunch of something and just let it sit around, because you had to make the paper. You had to cast the type. You had to set the type. You had to print every bloody page. You had to sew that stuff together. You had to make all of that happen. So you're not just going to make stuff because I'm an artist and I think it's important. You got to know as Ann would say, read your room. And so, that's something that Dürer figures out. And if you start...
And that's a first, really.
Oh, totally.
Really. That needs to be emphasized.
That we're aware of.
Well, true.
Yeah, but but on the scale of Dürer, yeah, it's the first of its kind. And what's really fun to do when I'm showing things in class is I'll show, an early work of Dürer, and then he saw this by Schongauer and how it influences what he makes next. And to just really see, where he's been. Oh, another thing that had totally dazzled him was just this Italian sense of the body underneath. There's a real famous print that Ann will put in, because Ann has to do all the pointy, clicky, smart stuff into the computer. All I do is stand and talk. But he had seen prints by Montagna, I believe, and he knew he wanted to meet Montagna, who was a great Italian artist, painter, a fresco artist extraordinaire, who had made, maybe 7 or 11 or very few prints, but extraordinary prints, engravings. He wanted to meet Montagna, and he wanted to understand how Palaiuolo had made this Battle of the 10 Nude Men, where you have 10 male figures in maximal pumped up motion as they're fighting each other nude in front of a backdrop of corn or sorghum. And it's a lesson in how many different kinds of weapons can guys brandish at each other, and how many positions can the human body be seen in any one space. And it's brilliantly composed. That was something else that Dürer absolutely adored about Italian art, was that the structure of the paintings, the compositions, made so much more sense than the way images were laid out in the North. That Italian sense of the stability of arranging things in a pyramidal structure, or, perspective, how to render objects convincingly that look as though they're in three-dimensional space, even though you're looking at a two-dimensional surface. And Dürer is the one who really put those lessons together. In fact, late in his life, he would publish several treatises, one on human proportion and another one on perspective, another one on battles and fortifications. That's not fair. And then you start thinking, this guy knows a whole lot about a whole lot of things. And that would be why we might call him the Leonardo of the North, because he, in some respects, really, I think, aspired to be as Leonardo and have all of those various kinds of knowledge. It's rumored that they met in 1505 when Dürer went over the Alps the second time. So, just putting together all the best ideas that you can find in a faraway place, going to Mars and finding all the best stuff and bringing it home and making it work, would influence his ability to create and render and teach and make.
I don't think I know those illustrations that must have come out of those treatises, but I don't think I realized that he was writing the text.
Yeah. And some of them were published posthumously. But the other thing that's very interesting is when you look at there's one drawing that he does of the figure seen from above. And they honestly, they're topographical maps. And he is seeing, as we would a computer, they look like computer-generated drawings, because he can understand the top of the head, the circumference of the head, and we go down, we get to the width of the shoulders and how the shoulders are positioned over the midriff, and then the feet underneath. He can see, like Leonardo, in 3 dimensions and be able to understand that, and really understanding the concept of human proportion, which is another thing that made Italian painters so dazzling to him, because the bodies made sense in space. They could stand on their own 2 feet. He learned things like this marvelous concept of the contrapposto pose, this S curve. When you stand in line at the grocery store, do you stand on both feet like stock still, or do you put more weight onto one foot and relax? And so one of your legs is tense and the other is relaxed, and the other part of your body responds to that, and one arm will be tense and one will be relaxed. There's a beautiful S curve, and understanding how the body can hold itself in space is something that Dürer really figured out. Ann and I are looking right now, I wish you could see them, at 2 self-portraits, one that he had done early in his career, and then one that was very evidently done after his Italian trip. And, what do you see in that first part, the one on the left?
Well, it's certainly well done, but the proportions are kind of weird. The shoulders are bizarre. The face is like the neck's too long. I don't know. It's weird.
What's wonderful about it, I mean, also look at how the hands are folded. The hands are brilliant, the way they're folded in those gloves. Here's something that the northern artists did before the Italians, was that 3/4 view. And the view through the window, having that landscape that we see through a window. But the 3/4 view was not something Italian painters were doing until much later in the century. Their Italian portraits were almost invariably dead on or in extreme profile, as though they were medallions, like on a coin or on a triumphal arch. And so the Italian painters went, ooh, these northern artists are doing, 3/4 poses, and I get more of a sense of you. And then if you look at the portrait that Dürer does, his self-portrait from, I think it's 1501, it's at the Alta Pinakothek. And it's got to be I hate the term bucket list. It's a punch list. We're going to Germany and for one of your significant birthdays. I never have significant birthdays anymore.
The one that's at the Alta Pinakothek it's full frontal, and he, honest to God, looks like pictures that you see of imagine Jesus Christ.
Well,
and he's got his hand on the fur lapel of his thing, but in my brain, it's always
the
blessing hand.
Absolutely.
Hilarious.
It's hilarious, but it's also such a wonderful literal conceit, right? What's one thing you can see in both portraits is that, man, I have some gorgeous hair, right? I mean, beautiful ringlets with gold filaments.
He looks like Chris Cornell from Soundgarden.
Okay, I'll take it. But it's interesting to see that the second portrait, he wants to recreate himself as an artist and have the kind of respect that Italian painters had, and that was not a tradition in the North. People didn't regard painters as great stars in the North at all. They were more of a craftsman set.
Were there self-portraits in the Italian schools by then?
Yeah, but well, I mean, sure, we could start thinking about, yes, but it's not like that. The Jan van Eyck portrait from 1434, that's one of the very first. And it's minuscule. And it says, even though it looks bizarrely photographic, it says, El Sichan, I've painted it to the best of my abilities. Well, it'll make you weep. It's so unbelievably convincing and true to sight. And one of the things that Dürer picked up from that was the painter's looking right at you, and he's taking everything, and you get the glint of the window frame in the eye. And by golly, it's also in the eye of Dürer in this Alta Pinakothek one. You can, if you are forced, it totally demands that you walk up to it and you go, because all of the down of the fur, his beard is a softer kind of a whisker. And then you notice that there is this window, literally, it forms the highlight of his eye. And you understand that the fur is this marvelous kind of mink is there. And he, look at what he did to the background. He left all the background out. He painted it away. You don't even need that. All you need to do is look at me. I am the creator. And that was that sense of that the northern sense of the artist as creator. I see everything in God's sight, and I will help you understand what all God has made. And there's a spirituality to that when you think about the time and care and intensity and meditation lavished on an image such as this, yeah, sure, we could chuckle about it and say, it's Dürer Sophie, or you could go, oh my God, look at what he's figured out here. And look at how hard he's looking down inside himself. It's a manifesto. This is who I am now. And that's in the space of 3 years.
That's when you see these guys, it's the 3-year bit I had forgotten. That is amazing.
It's like going to college.
Well, and also the idea of artistic genius. Like prior, they had all been part of guilds, and it was a job, not like you're sitting in your studio doing whatever.
No, you don't just dream it up like, I'm going to go to my garret and I shall make this. You're part of a guild. The guild, you have contracts. This is what your client wants. They want an altarpiece. They want these 2 patron saints, because those are the guys that represent my family. I want this many cherubs. I want it this size. It's going to go in my chapel, and I need it by X date. And this is how much I'm going to give you. And if you want a lot of blue, it's going to cost you more. It's just, it was a business. But, when a young man And this is a young man. Think about going to Italy. You've walked across the Alps and you want to go meet great artists, and you see what they're doing, and you look at how the community respects the maker in Italy, and you look at how much better they're treated. And Dürer says, I'm going to bring that to the north, and he does.
The Italian painters were rock stars?
Oh, certainly by the end of the century, sure. So who are the Ninja Turtles?
Oh, right. Raphael,
Yeah.
Michelangelo,
Leonardo.
Donatello, and Leonardo.
Right. Now, Donatello we think of more as a sculptor, but...
And a kick-ass one.
Oh, but he'd do it in wood. He could do it in bronze.
Oh,
he could do it in marble.
They're beautiful.
Yeah, he could cross-train, and it's not fair. And it's interesting. It's interesting also because he was so early. But even if you look at Donatello's work, you start realizing that he's an inheritor of the understanding of the human body unclad. And he lives to be 80.
Is that right?
Yeah. Now that's another weird little thing I do is I like trying to figuring out how long people are around and how long that they had to create and when was their greatest idea. There's a great book out there. It's called Old Masters and Young Geniuses. And, in some respects, Dürer was a young genius. And then you think about somebody like Titian, who was still painting, in his 70s. And you look at how his work has changed over time. He should have been a Ninja Turtle too, by the way. He got rooked, right? But I think they didn't want kids to be saying Titian. So, you go with Raphael and Leonardo and Michelangelo. But you look at paint like Michelangelo, and who lives to be 89 years old. That's 2 lifespans. And Dürer, my buddy Dürer, only makes it to 57. And I start thinking, having passed that age myself now, where are you as a maker? And in a way, you're responsible for what you make at this point. The reason these people are so astonishing is because they found the doors. They fucking invented the doors to open and go through. They invented an entire new way of thinking, seeing, doing. And that's something that this young man figures, well, I'm going to get cocksure at young age. But then he does it, and he transforms so many things. Now, he gets back. He's now back in Nuremberg, and it's like, I don't know, what are we talking, 1498, let's say, because it's true. And he's like trying to sell his paintings, and they're okay. If you looked at his paintings, that's got the brilliant, wonderful oil paint of the North, and he's regarded as a master. He's like, well, this is stupid. I don't make nearly as much for my paintings as I do for my prints, because you can make more. And so here comes the part that just totally stokes me. Here's why Dürer is such a badass. He's been working for Anton Koberg, my godfather, and his godfather's in charge of a printing business. What do they print usually? Oh, Bibles and other things. There are histories and plays and sonnets and stuff that are going on out there, but largely it's going to be religious texts. And Dürer decides to publish something, the Apocalypse, based on the book of Revelations. Now, in a Bible, the last book of the New Testament, it's going to have an image on the page. It might be a quarter of the page, maybe, because it's about the scripture, and it's going to be one small image on the page, and then maybe, a column and a half of text. And Dürer, let's see, it's 1498, all right? So he's 27, and he thinks, I'm going to make an apocalypse. I'm going to do a book about the end of time, the apocalypse being the great revelation, the unveiling of, and in some respects it is a day of woe, but it's also a time when you come to see more clearly. And he thinks, I'm going to make this Revelations, and it's going to be big. I'm going to make a woodcut Revelations, and the pages are, I don't know, like 11 by 15 inches. That's a good size page. That's a big piece of paper, frankly. And he makes this kick-ass title page. Oh, by the way, the Altarpiece Museum had all of the pages of the Apocalypse. And it has a nice title page, and then 15 other images that are the entire page. The entire page is filled with an image of, St. John looking at God in heaven and the 7 candlesticks, the 7 tribes of Israel, or St. John consuming the text that's being handed to him by God the Father, or the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and they fill the entire page. And Dürer sold them two different ways. You could buy them with text or without. But the text was on the back. You could buy them as fine prints unto themselves, or you could get the text, but it was on the back because his image owned the page. So in that sense, he created the first artist's book. You could buy them single sheet, you could buy the whole suite, you could buy them with the text on the back, but that is brilliant. Not only that, he published them not just in Latin, which was the language of the church, but what else?
In German.
Auf Deutsch! Why?
The language of the people.
You mean so the people could actually have access to the end of time and understand what this great moment would be when all is judged? That makes sense. And the year is 1498, and it's the end of time. Wonder why he's so smart that way. Well, gosh, that's 2 years before 1500. 1500. Now, if you were a person living in the north of Europe at the time, and it's the late Middle Ages, and maybe starting the Renaissance, and you're in there, you're still living in a world that's really based on scripture, and that's a super hard demarcation, and that was going to be the year of the second coming, and all would perish. It would be the end of time. It was the time for the second coming. We had talked about the Nuremberg Chronicle in an earlier talk. That was published by Hartmann Schadel at Godfather's Press. Well, it was published in 1493, and the last 7 pages of the book were left blank so that you could buy your book and you could write about your family, and then you'd all be gone. So not only is it smart, it's also timely, and it's like the end of time. So yeah, that worked out. And he designed all the images, and he carved them, and they're freaking brilliant.
Do we know that there's some debate about whether or not he carved them, right? But before we get to that, I want to ask you if you were to own one of these 16...
Oh, hell, that's not fair.
It is. What do you mean? I mean, the obvious one, of course, is the four horsemen.
Everybody would own that one. But
I think that's the one I'd own.
Well, I mean, sure, the four horsemen. Okay, Anne, why would you want to own the four horsemen of the apocalypse?
Well, I think because it's, the 7 candlesticks and the language of the book coming out of the mouth, like the four horsemen is very clear, and that sort of symbolism of the 4 horses has come down through popular culture. So it's more understandable for people who aren't, mired in the scripture. And there's all sorts of fun, cool gewgaws and animals and, all kinds of weird stuff. There's ghouls and demons and the maw of hell eating the bishop. And
it's just delightful.
It is. It's amazing. It's amazing.
If you really think about it, because it's a motion picture too. These 4 horsemen, these 4 entities galloping from left to right, which instantly helps us carry our eye in motion, and you've got these 4 terrifying forms that are being carried across the picture plane by these beasts. These horses have, beautiful legs. They're knobby. They have hair. You can almost sense the steam coming out of its nose. And to the right, the furthest one on the right has got a bow and arrow. The second guy is wielding a sword. The third guy has got dangling behind him is a set of scales. And then in the lower left-hand corner is this scrawny little horse carrying the figure of death on it. Well, so the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, so you've got the guy with the bow and arrow is pestilence. It's the symbol of the plague, because you got the plague by being shot with arrows. But
what?
Yeah, that's just, you got to go in your iconography. Okay, and so then, of course, war would be the one with the sword. And who is the guy with the scales? Why is the guy with the scales? What would he be? Well, if you got pestilence and you got war.
Oh, famine.
That's famine. Weighing of grain. Weighing
right.
of grain. Plus, interesting, it's also weighing of souls, too, at the same time. And so these terrifying figures, they're absolutely, just fierce in their mission. And in the top left corner, you see the voice of God coming down. It's these almost lightning bolts of them going, go, take care of this business and get it over with. And these 4 horsemen are trampling over people in front of them. And yes, it is the Pope being eaten by the maw of hell in the lower left-hand corner. Convenient little political thing there, and the archangel Michael above is going, "Go guys, go!" with these marvelous, almost what I would call pie crust clouds. It's beautifully stylized, and yet it is such a phenomenal leap from any kind of image making that had come before, because in cutting the wood, he's created something that looks like gray, as opposed to just saying, here's a place that's black and here's a place that's white. It's that he's managed to give a three-dimensional vitality to each and every object, animal, figure, motion in this. The tails are whipping in the breeze, and the hooves are clearly going to land right on these poor twisted up people that are, there's already suffering. And the background, he uses horizontal lines which do nothing but carry our eye from left to right. It's just packed full of activity. I mean, there is no eye resting space. But of course, when it's the apocalypse, it's the end of time. I don't think you've got, I need a resting place for my eye. That's just not part of the way you need to sell an image, Well,
true. But the size of it, the scale, and the amount of dynamic carving that's going on in there, you're absolutely right. It's heads and shoulders above anything that had come before it. And I think it must have shocked people.
Oh my God. I mean, that was going to IMAX when all you used to get to see was something flickering on something the size of your phone, but without the graphics of your phone. And oftentimes in class, I'll show the students a similar scene, a Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which was carved about 1450. And it's like, okay, this is what your drawing of a person or the sun looked like in first grade. And this is after you went to art school. And that's not to denigrate the guys that were carving in mid-century. These fellas had figured some stuff out. And I'm saying fellas because I'm presuming they were guys. These folks had figured this out. But notice here that they are also they are carving the image and the text in the same block. And Dürer's like, no, I don't need any text in there except for two little letters that you should be really aware of.
Right.
What's he do right there, center bottom, big as life?
Yeah, he puts his monogram, A-D.
So you've got the, and it's so smart because the capital A, the A is bigger than Dürer, the family name. It's Albrecht. And it's hanging there at the bottom. It's impossible to miss, but it still works compositionally. It's almost like the fulcrum. Almost like the kind of thing that the energy is all stemming from him. If you really look at the thing, like looking at almost like a metronome or a fan of
rotating around him.
Yeah, it's all about me. But it is, damn it, And he figures this out, and of course, it's a dandy image for that. Now, the other thing I do like to point out is that with woodcut, he had managed by looking at these copper engravings that Schongauer was doing. He'd managed to take that same fearsomeness and all of this, the incredible fur and scales and fins and feathers and managed to recreate that in wood. And it's completely different things. I want you to try and imagine carving a really delicate image into a carrot with a kitchen knife. And that's essentially what Dürer was doing. It's miraculous.
Oh yeah, single-edged knife, wasn't it?
Yep.
No V-gouges.
Nope. It was like, you put a little, and you have to cut around every one of those lines.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's where you start thinking about how the hell did he manage to make those little tiny areas. So yeah, of course it's the one that's got all the best juice. But I that's impossible. Like, okay, so the St. Michael, that's a great one. But I because I'm such a biblio whore, I'm a total book slut. We're sitting in my new house, and I can't tell you how many volumes of books there are here.
Lots.
And they're all very important. But it's the one where St. John is being handed the text by...
That is a good one.
He's literally devouring the book. And, that to me really says, that's an understanding. It's a statement of faith. It's not as iconologically easy to read, but like the one where St. Michael is vanquishing all of these hideous creatures, there's this gorgeous little Tyrolean landscape underneath it that just says, this is happening right around you, right over your head. Be aware of that. But every one of those is, it's hard to say. So, but, if you go online and you look at For All 15, then you'd have to pick out your own favorite. And you could, because he would have sold you a single sheet, or he would have sold you all of them.
I want one.
I do, I do too. I really do. I think they're probably out of a price range, but I'd still go for the Dancing Skeletons from the Nuremberg Chronicle. That's also from End of Time.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the prices lately.
Yeah, I think we better.
Okay. I mean, I was interviewing another artist and we were discussing Dürer's rhinoceros and the prices on that. And he believed that they were, above 500,000. I was like, that can't be. That just can't be. And I looked one up, of course, and it was from a 2013 sale at Christie's, and it was $866,000 or something. But the estimate was 100 to 150. And as Ben rightly pointed out, 2 people wanted that.
That was one of the smarter things I've ever heard Ben say.
Right?
Yeah. Ben has a marvelous little pithy way about him. But yeah, somebody wanted that, Now that comes later, that's 15. But and we may end up having to do 2 days on Dürer.
We may well.
Because to understand, oh my God, I mean, just think in your own mind's eye. Think about some voyage that you personally have taken that absolutely transformed you, that totally rocked your world, that changed the way you thought and saw and functioned, you personally. I'm talking to you, the listener. Ann's not going to go, what? What do we mean?
No, I'm trying to think of one.
Seriously. And that's the thing. You might think, gosh, I was 13 or 14. And I could say it was something in the past year that totally transformed the way I thought. But the enormity of what goes on in our lives at any given time makes us receptive to something, or how hungry are you for new information? How badly do you want it? And this is a young man who was not dumb. He knew he was already consorting with brilliant people of his own time. He was aware of the brilliant artists of the day, and he went out. He literally walked over mountains to meet them. Even if, let's say, he wanted to go meet Montaigne, because that's why he went to Italy. And, well,
he was dead.
He was dead. But, so fine, I'll figure it out another way. So we're all the way up to 1498, and Dürer doesn't die until 1528. So he does a few other things after that. But the other thing I'll bring up just about the Apocalypse is that the first edition was published in 1498. Both in German and Latin, and yet there was a second printing in 1511 only in Latin. And I bet it was more expensive because it was well known, and only the folks that could read Latin would want it or could afford it by then, because by then he's very, very famous. And he's wealthy enough to have a really fine 4-story home in downtown Nuremberg with his very own indoor bathroom, unlike anybody else in the city. So,
was his press in the house?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's there.
You can go visit it.
And you should be significant birthday, I'm telling you. We're going.
All right.
It's really lovely. Nuremberg, well, they have good beer there, too. They have a beautiful cathedral. And it is that city that's right in the center of the Nuremberg Chronicle, so you can visit it, as it was in 1493. But
wasn't Nuremberg firebombed during World War II?
The fact that so many of these things still exist.
It's amazing.
Yes, it is. And, but again, having, you would maintain Dürer's house, that's a huge figure, because that put all of this part of of Europe on the map as a place to be contend with. So here's this 27-year-old fella, and the point also is, of course, the world didn't end in 1500, and now he's got this thing, and what else am I going to do? Another annoying thing about our buddy Dürer is that he could do not just the wood cutting, and I believe he cut those first ones.
You do?
I do. It's possible that I do.
They're too hard. How could?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Because it's 1498. He's on cutting edge. He's on the leading edge of what can I make this knife and this piece of wood do, and so the Formschneiders, the woodcutters of the time, had to learn to keep up with these folks like Dürer. It's entirely possible that he didn't cut all the later ones. He would have been the Heiser. He would have dreamt up the idea, and by the time he's such a big hot shot, he maybe could have handed it off to a form carver. But let's talk about it when he's designing a copper engraving. A copper engraving where you're literally taking that insanely sharp beveled edge of a burin and driving it into a copper plate. There's no way anybody else is going to carve that.
No, of course not.
No, not at all. And what I'm showing Ann right here, right now, is an image from 1497. It's the four witches. And
was it called the Four Witches, or do we just assume now that it is the Four Witches?
I mean, of course, admittedly, it's all part of the strangeness of its time. Let's see what Linda Holtz, the one who knows it all. Four witches, four naked women. There's your other title.
Oh.
Four, what did I just say?
Witches,
naked women.
Naked.
I don't, see, again, I maintain that I don't think they're naked. I think they're nude. I don't think they look the slightest bit embarrassed.
Is that the difference?
Yes. You don't go to a nakedist colony, do you?
No.
You go to a nudist colony.
All right.
Because, and he has this image of four women essentially standing in a bit of a circle. But it's also called the Four Witches for several reasons. But they're four. Well, you tell me what you see. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because when we were showing this in class, I was always looking at it upside down.
I know. Isn't that strange? Me too.
So today we're looking at a PowerPoint that Tru has on his computer. And for the first time, I'd never have noticed the skull at the foot of the center woman. And I've also never noticed the oddness of this back on the figure on the left.
Indeed. And this, again.
What's going on over here?
There's a little hell there. A little hell, some flames, it's the end of time. And then above, okay, so there are these four women. Now, you're being very kind. The oddness of that back. Well, it's an opportunity for him to show nudity, right? And only one of them is facing towards us. And they definitely seem like women that might have existed in the world around him, as opposed to Greek goddesses that were rendered by an Italian artist. I think this is a piece that he dreamt up to teach himself some things. I got to admit that the leg on the left, on the woman with the very strange back and the weirdly strange small buttocks that look very odd, that lower leg looks exactly like my late sister Jeanette. She had these teeny little ankles, and that's the formation of her leg. I mean, there are parts of that that are absolutely convincingly human. The back on the one doesn't quite read, but I don't think he'd learned enough yet. The back on the woman in the center.
The center is much better.
Much better, although
those arms are...
The left the right bun cheek, as we're looking at her back, seems like it's sort of drifting off a little bit.
Well, I have thighs like that.
Okay. But is this a goldsmith's son? Look at that hair.
Yeah.
Look how beautifully knotted. Every curl. A goldsmith's son would be able to do the kind of engraving you would expect to see on liturgical chalices and the beautiful decorations in her hair. And then the woman on the right, actually, she's doing pretty well.
The boobs are a little Michelangelo.
A little Michelangelo-esque, yes. You mean like softballs glued onto a...
Correct.
Yeah. But that was Michelangelo's gig. I told you that whole Michelangelo here story.
I don't think so.
Oh, well, okay. Should I do a sidebar?
We can do a sidebar.
All right, because remember, Big Mike is working at the same time, too.
Right?
Because all three of the Ninja Turtles are alive at the exact same time that Dürer is working. In fact, our notes are telling us that Dürer and Raphael had a correspondence. But Michelangelo really did look to the Greek models for the figures. But there's a scene, actually, it's very funny, in the 1964 film, The Agony and the Ecstasy, a book by Irving Stone. By Stone. Whatever. You have to fix that in post. There's a scene where the soldiers of Julius II are trying to find Michelangelo because he's so pissed because he doesn't want to paint the ceiling and he's run away from the Pope. And so the soldiers are hunting all over Italy to try and find him. And they go into a house of ill repute and they storm into this room. And there's a prostitute who looks up and there's a man who pulls the blankets up under his chin. And they say, "Have you seen Michelangelo?" And she says, "Michelangelo here?" Because they knew he was homosexual.
Right.
Well, it's not like he spent a lot of time looking at women.
No, of course, yes.
And that's why those always look like...
Yeah,
it's just
boobs always look weird because he didn't have any experience with boobs.
Well, why bother, I mean, he's not interested. Okay, but look at the beautiful turn on the neck of that one. Now, the thought for this is that these three of these witches are initiating the youngest one into their coven. And there's a peculiar orb that's hanging above their head that says OGH on it, and in the year 1497, and which could translate as "Oh God forbid" or "Gott in Himmel" or about several different things. And why is he doing this image of witches? This is cool. Well, women, yeah, are problematic. And there had been a book called the Malleus Maleficarum that had been published in 1487, called The Witch's Hammer. It was an entire book about how to ferret out witches and punish them. It was essentially the Renaissance version of the Salem witch trials. And it was so conveniently published the year before at Uncle Anton's Press. Well, it's hot. People are buying The Witch's Hammer. It had been translated in many languages, and so he's made a print that tackles an issue of the day. And are they beautiful or are they icky? And the answer is yes.
Yes and no.
But it's engraved in copper. And another thing to remember about any carving, whether it's engraved in copper or a woodcut, is that there's a huge difference between what it looks like when you're carving it and when it's printed. The whole image has been reversed. And on the human figure, boy, it can be wildly unkind. If we were to walk that over and shine it in the mirror, they might read a little bit more. But what it shows us is also an opportunity to see how insanely much he has learned between this print in 1497 and when he puts out the Adam and Eve in 1504.
True enough. But my question is, it's not very big, right? It's 8 inches maybe by something. But who's going to want this in their home? Well, witch hunters or?
Well, see, that's an interesting point, because he's also developing the taste of the collector. Because, what was a print going to be? The concept of collecting prints was changing. And for people who are buying engravings, it was the idea of having a collection of images now. It's not like you're going, I'm going to go home and worship my 4 witches. You're going to pull come, let's take a look at these and ponder these small things. Now, here's a perfect example of patent evil, and look what they're doing, and women are evil, and it's a perfect way of laying it all on the wife. It's a kind of, it's a way of putting together a collection of things that dazzle and interest you. And I see him ferreting out a part of a market and training it in a certain way. So it's odd, but I think we can't skip over it, because I think it's an important learning piece, and it's an opportunity to see him not just doing churchy stuff. You see him doing a lot of churchy stuff. It's like, it's not all. What sells? Well, obviously he wouldn't have. You don't make something like this and go, it was a dud, and throw it out. There was something going there. So that's a big deal. And yet, if we compare it to his engraving of Nemesis, which is something I would always get my students to make them limp in the knees, and this is only 3-4 years later, and yet you can tell that this woman, definitely Northern European, definitely fed. She has that Northern European belly, which should make us all feel really great. Like, you don't always have to suck it in. Be a woman and enjoy the fact that your body does these things. But Nemesis is this almost jowly figure, would you say?
Except her boobs need to be about 4 inches lower.
Well, maybe they're just perky.
Super perky.
Well, the thing is that the figurative proportions he's basing on Vitruvius.
Oh, right.
He'd been looking at Vitruvius, who was the classical Roman architect who had published his books of architecture and human proportion in the 1st century before the Common Era. Well, Vitruvius is the same dude that was writing that book that Leonardo decided he had to do the engraving of the Vitruvian Man of. The guy that's standing there looking like a star in the circle in a square, because there's these certain kinds of geometric truths that exist in the human body, but Vitruvius and others would believe was an extension of that, and that the true proportions of our body had spiritual meaning.
I've always read this as really right on, because I guess I focus on her belly and her thighs and her butt, but like the boobs are now, I can't look away.
You can't unsee them?
No, they're weird.
Well, you know why they seem small? It's because the wings are coming out of the scapula, because I would venture to say that if you were to think about the curve in the back, they wouldn't seem quite so small.
Okay.
But if you look at how he's managed to make it seem, you guys, there's a woman standing nude on an orb, which could be the world, and this globe is divided from this astonishing engraving of a Tyrolean town, beautiful town, seen from a bird's eye view with little alpine seeming, Bavarian houses and a river and trees and all this lovely normal world beauty. And here is Nemesis. She's also called the Great Fortune, standing on this orb and above the cloud line is this negative space. It's all white. And all we see is this magnificent profile figure of a woman with a bridle in one hand and this thing. Look how important that piece of drapery going behind her is, because it echoes the wings, these glorious wings,
and the clouds
that she's sporting. And she's in the other hand, in her left hand, she's got a bridle, and in the right hand, she's got this beautiful chalice. And her hair is all done beautifully. And she's standing there with both of these objects. And of course, we're going to go, why? But it's interesting. Nemesis, this is where you start going, why is he making this? It's not Joe Blow, who's going to go like to church on Sundays, isn't collecting this. It's people who read Latin and Greek. And Nemesis is the figure that, if I recall correctly, carries the knowledge from Greece to Rome. And so it all is part of the humanists of the day, and it really shows you actually how insanely well read Dürer was. He was gobbling up all of the smarty McMarty kinds of reading of the time. And Nemesis is there, and why is she holding a bridle and this goblet, this big gorgeous goblet, which a goldsmith has clearly made? Well, it is, one is a reward and the other is a punishment. And it has to do with choices that you make. And it's very cryptic, and we don't know entirely what it means. And that's the beauty of things like this, too, is that we don't know all of those meanings, but that's why you sit here and you study this. And why is she separated from the earth below? And why are we given this translation from one state to another? But I'm sorry, it always goes back to the wings.
Oh, they're quite astonishingly beautiful, and the print is big. It's a
him,
really big one.
It is good size. And that's a big piece of copper, which means a big piece of paper. It's, if I recall correctly, it's more like 10 by 15. It's good size. It's bigger than the Meisterstücke, yes, than the big three, which we probably won't get to today because you guys just got to know a little bit more about Dürer, and that's all you get. But here is a guy that's fine-tuning two completely different skills at the same time. That's not fair.
Wood and copper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like be fluent in, let's choose some Vietnamese.
Right.
And also be fluent in Urdu.
Yeah.
They have completely different temperaments and sources and demands, and they have different tools and a different kind of weight and carve and speed and placement of the touch of the artist. And you have to understand what each of these substances will permit you to do and how far you can push them. Like wood may just laugh at you. It'll break anytime it wants. And metal, copper, is going to say, sure, go ahead and put some marks on me, but don't sneeze. Don't be nervous. Don't be jittery. Because every mark you put in that has to be there, the right place, at the right time. It's the right time. It's like being in tune on that, and you can't fix it. And there's no place in there that you could fix. The only way you could do it is scrape it out of the plate, and that would show. And the beautiful thing also is if you covered up my Bavarian Nemesis woman, it is sort of the body, a nemesis of any woman who doesn't say, says, I don't want to look like that. It's like, if you want to know what you're going to look like when you get older, look at your mom. Mm-hmm. Well, she's very momly.
Yes.
And it's fine, and she's beautiful and she's being represented. Let's think about that,
Well, her age is that she's not some young sprite or something.
Who would be smart enough to deliver the knowledge from one thing to another?
I love that he's paying attention to those kinds of details. Absolutely.
And the details, again, like all the bits of nature, just the things that he could see around him, like those clouds. They're absurd. I mean, they turned from fabric into vapor. Well, okay, so that's 1501. And I like to think about, another thing I do show my students is like how acute is this person's, as Albrecht, or any person's sense of awareness of the world around them. How much time are you going to give yourself to really study something? And I remember going on about giving things time. There was this just glorious exhibition of Dürer's work down at the National Gallery. God, that's been, 10 years now? Mm-hmm. And they did have this amazing watercolor. Watercolor was not something artists were doing at the time, and Anne should be compelling like par excellence. It's a watercolor, and it's big. Yeah. It's like, it's almost 18, it's closing in on 18 by 24. And
it's weeds.
It's weeds or it's yarrow, and these are botanically correct specimens of vegetation that springs out of a moist kind of earth, and he's given you that, and he shows you way one blade of grass crosses over another, and he pays attention to the spaces between these objects.
The ground reversal is amazing.
That's absurd, right? And to spend that kind of time, it's dandelions, it's a weed, but they're not, they weren't weeds back then. These were parts of the earth that God made. And he made every one of those things, and each one of those leaves has a certain shape, and they have a function for why they're there. And oftentimes I'll even compare this to the way that Leonardo uses the vegetation next to the Virgin of the Rocks. That kind of understanding of having actual nature visible in this highly spiritual space brings it to us. And it just not, it's up there in Xanadu, someplace in the clouds. But this is just, it's literally called the Great Piece of Turf. And I'm sure he didn't call it the Great Piece of Turf, but that's what it is noticing these things and the little, for you, if you were to watch ants working away on something and give yourself, how long do you suppose it took him to paint that? Hours. How long do you think?
Oh, God. Well, it depends on how facile he is, but that would take me days.
It would take days. Even he would have spent at least a day on that, because you'd have to wait for things to dry, go back in, pull them out. You've got to reserve your whites. It's a watercolor. That's not even fair, because it's a totally different skill than oil painting. And yet that kind of study and that kind of devotion, I really believe that when you make an image like this, anything that you took a great deal of time to render, it's a meditation. You shut everything else off. You can only make that if you are fully present at looking at that piece of soil and noticing every aspect of it and making it visible to someone else. And that's why Dürer is showing himself to be godlike. He is creating, he's recreating, so a viewer would be able to have an entrance into an image. That doesn't even make sense, And that's a Northern Renaissance concept of how to make the world visible to everyone. Yeah, it's fairly exquisite. If you could see it, and you should probably put this on.
Yeah, I think it'll go.
Yeah. And so if you think about an image of Dürer's that you've seen, it would be the bunny, the rabbit. It's a lovely, lovely drawing with some watercolor highlights of a rabbit. It's just sitting there being a rabbit, and with enormous ears. And it was done in 1502. It shows you what he's studying. If you think of the praying hands, which you've seen remade in so many things, just looking at a pair of hands, and they could be anybody's hands, but these two hands happen to be pushed together, and they happen to be viewed from a certain angle so that they're praying, and they've been put on postage stamps and wedding presents and necklaces and
placemats and restaurants
and coffee cups and neckties. And if you see one of those neckties, get me one.
Okay.
But you'll realize, I have seen his work, because his vision and taking that in is so important. And it is happening at a time and we know these things in ways that we don't know. Leonardo had that same inquisitive eye, but Leonardo's stuff was never published. And Dürer was, how do you guys put it in your world? It's public facing. What is it? You've got your public facing and he was always public facing. Leonardo was always in his head. And that's why I think these things make is that artists have to notice those subtle nuances of nature. And maybe we'll just stop after this one, because this is a pretty big high point right here. Okay. 1504. Yeah. This was essentially his website. Okay. This is a print that y'all should know. It's called The Fall of Man. It's also known, you will know it as Adam and Eve, and he engraved it in 1504. And I would say that it is maybe 7 by 8 inches max.
Yes.
And It's bigger on the screen here than it is in life.
It's small.
However, pretend you've never seen this, and I want you to describe to your listeners what you see.
Okay. You have two figures, Adam and Eve. Adam is on the left as we look at him, and Eve is on the right, and they're both nude.
Very good.
Not naked. Funnily, though, they have conveniently placed leaves in front of their private
Nature's
parts.
nice that way.
Yeah. And right between them is a pretty straight tree, around a branch of which is the serpent with the apple, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Adam, in his right hand, is holding a branch upon which is a placket that announces the artist's name.
It's pretty funny that it actually says Albertus Dürer of Nuremberg made this in 1504. It's a big old plaque that's hanging on that.
Huge.
Yeah, on the branch. And on the branch also is what?
A parrot.
Which seems to be parroting, hey, Albrecht Dürer made it. Albrecht.
Oh, right. And then there are animals, also animals. Oh, so this is if I'm getting this right, correct me if I'm wrong. This is the moment before everything goes to hell in a handbasket, right? So the cat and the mouse at the feet of the two figures are happily
sedate,
coexisting.
Right, with a kitty is
right.
A big, I can tell. I love this print, not just because it's exquisite, but also because the cat in the front is, you can tell it's a big old ginger tabby, big old yellow kind of big purry kitty, but it's quietly almost asleep. And, maybe a foot away from it is a little mouse just hanging out, right? And Adam is standing in this very nice, glorious pose. What's behind Adam?
Well, there's a forest, and then there's an elk, mm-hmm. a hare, a rabbit, and a ox that looks like,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And all of these are behind our hero and heroine, who are really immediately in the foreground. And dividing this plate almost exactly in half is a tree, as Ann has mentioned, with a snake twizzled around it. And the snake is literally handing this fruit to Eve, who's like, oh, that looks interesting. And Adam appears to have one also in his hand. But they haven't eaten of it. Remember, God had said, do not eat from that tree. That's the tree of knowledge. And if you do, bad things will happen. Well, it is, yeah. So, but I always love the fact that it looks sort of like a birch tree, and it looks like a very Bavarian forest. And I didn't know that we were in, Bavaria, but this is a thick, deep, marvelous, like almost a black forest, if you will. And the forest is deep and dark, so much so that the figures are coming towards us, and they're so sculptural. I mean, he's managed to give us the magnificence of the male figure is based on Roman copies of mythology, and he's obviously been looking at Roman art.
Isn't that the Apollo Belvedere?
Yes, of course. He's been. Yeah, I traveled. Hey, I traveled to Italy, and they have these aces sculptures. Yeah. But I'm just going to use that pose, and I'm going to make it this guy with nice close cropped hair, and he's standing there looking so righteous, and he is. You guys, he's got a 6-pack. He's got the right number of packs too. Later in the century, that people lose their way.
He's attractive,
and he's perfectly proportioned, and he's got the perfect contrapposto. He's stable but moving fluidly. And on the right hand side is Eve, and she's looking at the snake who's handing her this thing, and she's also standing in contrapposto. And while the figure of Adam is based on classical sculpture, Eve is sort of a Venus, but she's also looks a tad more Bavarian. She's got, again, those very high, small breasticles.
She's like a German version of Botticelli.
Yes. Ooh, well said.
All right.
Especially because of the hair. Wonderful hair. It's like, I'm the son of a goldsmith. I have to show you this. And they haven't bitten of the fruit yet, because that's, once they bite from the tree of knowledge, that's when they realize, oh my God, we're naked. And that's when they cover themselves up. At this moment, they're nude. They're beautiful. They're pure. They're the most exquisitely proportioned humans that God had ever made. And he gave them dominion over this entire garden. And these animals, which are all significant of the 4 humors of humankind, it's a medieval alchemical concept about the 4 kinds of humors in the human body that are in perfect balance. The world is in perfect array before they bite from the tree of knowledge. But once they do, it all falls to hell, and women will suffer in childbirth, and men will hate to work, and we will have original sin, and it'll last forever. And Dürer, this is such a marvelous, arrogant little moment. In the top right corner, way back in the top right corner, there's this little craggy mountaintop, and on that mountaintop, there's this little ram. It's a goat.
Mountain goat, right?
Mountain goat, and it is literally the minute they bite from that fruit, that goat falls off of that, and the animals will spring up, and the cat will start to eat the mouse, and it's just like the whole world will fall to hell. And it's balanced, and it's calm, and it's not.
Right.
And it's got this
like potential energy all over the place.
Oh my goodness! All of these, like the snake is not just the snake's body going around the tree, but also the hair, the even the bending of these two branches, which conveniently put little figgy leafies over their nether regions, and even the parrot is sitting quietly for the moment. But the four humors that are in there are also highly symbolic. So let's see if I remember this. The phlegmatic elk, the melancholy ox, the sanguine rabbit, and then the choleric cat is yellow bile.
Right.
So people are mad and angry and crabby. They're full of yellow bile, like when an old cat likes to be crabby. And rabbits, well, we know if you've got too much of that red blood flowing through you, you get to do what rabbits do a whole lot.
Gotcha.
So you become that. Let's see, the melancholy elk. Yeah, so if you have too much black bile, you're like, saturnine and depressive. And then the ox, oh golly, phlegmatic ox. You're listless, tired, you don't do anything. So if you're out of balance, so people that are like cranky, or people that are always depressive, or people that are randy little deadlies. All of those things are what make us up, and when they're all in balance, we're lovely and perfect, and it's a namaste moment. But it shows you the fall of man. The thing that's so thrilling about this is they found these images. They made it as far as India.
What?
In Dürer's lifetime.
What?
Yep. This was his best-selling print, and he gave this one away a whole lot. It was literally his website. He took this with him everywhere, and that makes all the sense when you look at how, look, this is the guy that made it, and I made it in this year, and you need to know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And
his full name instead of just his initials.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And the parrot's going, this is him.
Right.
Is the parrot of falsehood.
Right.
It literally is doing all of that. And it's brilliant, beautiful, fine art. I mean, this is a painter's drawing.
Yeah.
It is a painting that just doesn't have color applied to it. It's everything that goes under a painting, like an Italian painting, because these figures make perfect sense physically. They stand in space in their own 2 feet. You can sense that there's air going in and out of their lungs. This is a vibrant and alive but calm world for this moment. And all it takes is a bite of that apple. But remember, there were 2 sets of teeth marks in that apple.
That's right.
Don't blame it all on the ladies, even though they could turn into witches. That's the thing. It's the Renaissance after all.
Well, but it's all about translations and interpretations of words that have placed the blame on Eve all these years.
Always. And it's wonderful when you can print it 100 bazillion times and have it go across the world. That's how you perpetuate an image. But, look at all the new that's happening here. He's managed to weave so many of the tricks he learned in Italy with that steadfast northern sense of, I will show you every leaf, every apple, even the splits. And I love this. It's like, I didn't know it's a birch tree in the middle of Eden. I didn't know Eden was there. It's just, and it's craggy. It's brilliant. And that will be something you need to spend a lot of time looking at. Since you live in the digital age, zooming in on one of these suckers is ridiculous, because every tone that you see is made of a multiplicity of tiny lines or stippling in the plate with a tool where a man has pushed a sharp thing into a piece of copper.
Yeah, it's all line. There's no tone in here.
It's all built on touch, and nothing had existed like this before. And this is 10 years before the big 3 that we'll get to next time. But you can see why this would be somebody's website. So what is it, 1504?
1504.
So he's a whopping 33 now.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and then the next year he'll go to Italy again.
Again, yes.
He's now an art star. He's made it big time, and he's respected, and people can get their hands on his work, and that means that there's a whole bunch of artists that are going to want to be as him as well. And it's far and wide, man. Think about it. That's the best website you could ever make in 1504.
Yeah, he changes the role of the artist completely.
I mean, and we've just seen it with just a couple, 3 images that we blathered about, you know? It could be churchy, it could be the end of time, it could be witchy. It's just fascinating, and it's so exquisitely done, and it's unbelievably original.
Yeah.
It never existed before.
They're stunning.
Yeah. And that's why we think he's cool. And that's why he gets to have 2 episodes. This was the Italian Trip 1 episode.
That's right.
And so that's all we're going to do about it today. But thank you for listening, and happy looking.
Yeah, I'll do my very best to get good images up, or at least links to places where you can zoom in closely to see the line works on these.
Yeah, to do this, it is, to use Ann's wonderful phrase, it rewards scrutiny.
Yeah.
It truly, truly does. And, you know, if you zoom in with your camera or your phone or what have you, you'll realize that in any spot you go, whether you can recognize what's in it or not, you're looking at the most beautiful abstract that ever existed, because of the ways that the directions that each mark goes emulates whatever object it is describing. If it's a soft muscle, it travels across the muscle to describe it so that it looks volumetric, 3-dimensional. If it's hair, it understands and wraps in and around the hair. It is about burrowing under every nook and cranny of what it is you're going to look at, and figure out where the light will be, and then show that to the viewer. Every moment is worth, I mean, you could spend an entire day with this thing, and you would not be able to drink it all in.
I know. I see new things every time I look at it.
Absolutely. So enjoy.
Yeah. Thanks golly. I mean, you know, when I said, let's talk about Dürer because he's the bomb, like, I knew he was the bomb, but, you know, he's the bomb. All right, folks, we're going to take a pause there and conclude the first half of Dürer. We'll get to him in the next episode and finish him up, and then we'll skip along to someone else.
Yeah, we'll figure out who kicks the can of greatness down the road.
Yeah, I mean, there are many debatable figures along the way, but Dürer is, he's
pretty much cornerstone.
Yeah.
He's foundational. He takes a whole bunch of good raw material that exists on both sides of the Alps, and then welds it all into a new way of seeing, presenting, marketing. He creates himself to be the artist that he wants to be. You know, he sets out to become an international, and he does it. And then he doesn't stop, you know, because he's only 33. He's got another 24 years to go.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Happy looking. I mean it.
Thanks for joining us for Platemark Series 2, the history of Western printmaking, with me, Ann Shafer, and my co-host, Ludwig, who is our subject matter expert, as you can tell. The visuals for each of these episodes is going to reside on the show notes page for the podcast, platemarkpodcast.com. And in addition, I'm planning to include some links within the text that will lead you to places where you can zoom in pretty closely on some of these prints. So take a look and let us know what you think. And you all could do us a favor by telling your friends about us to spread the word. We know there are a lot of print-interested people out there, so we're relying on you to help us get the word out. Platemark Podcast Series 2 is produced by me, Ann Shafer, and our theme music is by Michael Diamond, who I thank for its use. Talk to you next time.